There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when someone realizes they have made a very expensive mistake. Not the silence of a loud argument that finally stops. Not the silence of an apology being given. But the silence of 25 people who just laughed along with something they should have stopped, realizing all at once that they have laughed at exactly the wrong person. I have thought about that silence many times in the years since that Thanksgiving. The way it moved through the room like weather. The way it started at one table and spread outward, face by face, until even the people at the far end, the ones who hadn't heard what Linda said, went quiet too, because they could read the room well enough to know that something had shifted. I have thought about what it took to get to that silence. Not just the evening of it, but the years, the place cards, the parking lot conversations I was never included in, the slow, steady accumulation of small humiliations, each one small enough to dismiss, each one building, the way water builds behind a dam that everyone agrees is fine. It's fine. It's always been fine, right up until it isn't. My name is Emma Walker. I am 38 years old. I am a senior interior designer. I have spent the better part of my career walking into rooms that other people built and figuring out what they were missing. I am good at that. Reading a space, understanding what it wants to be, seeing what's hidden in the structure that even the owner hasn't noticed yet. I should have been better at doing that for my own life. This is the story of a Thanksgiving dinner, a missing chair, a place card, and a room full of people who were about to discover that the woman they had been overlooking for 9 years had been holding something quietly in her hands the entire time. I didn't plan the ending. I want to be clear about that. I am not the kind of person who engineers moments for maximum effect. But I have learned something about the truth in the years since that night. The truth doesn't need a stage manager. It only needs a room and an opportunity. It found both that November. I met Daniel Walker at a friend's birthday dinner in 2012. He was 30 at the time, funny in a quiet way, the kind of man who listens more than he talks and makes you feel heard without trying. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. We were married in October of 2015 in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Virginia, 60 guests, afternoon light through bare oak trees, everything exactly what I had imagined. What I had not imagined clearly enough was Linda. Linda Walker is Daniel's mother. She is 64 years old, and she is the kind of woman who commands a room not by being the loudest person in it, but by being the person everyone is quietly watching for reaction. She has a gift for performing warmth in public and deploying precision in private. She hugs you at the door and compliments your coat, and then 20 minutes later, in a conversation with someone standing just close enough for you to hear, she mentions that she saw a coat just like yours on sale last week at a discount store. She doesn't look at you when she says it. She never looks at you when she says it. That is the whole technique. Linda ran a large extended family the way some people run organizations. There was a hierarchy, clearly understood by everyone, rarely spoken aloud. At the top, Linda, and by extension, anyone whose worth she had decided to publicly acknowledge. At the bottom, the people whose names she got slightly wrong, whose professions she described with the vagueness of someone who had never bothered to remember them correctly, and whose chairs, it would turn out, were more movable than anyone else's. I want to be fair to Daniel. He is not a cruel man. He is not a man who wanted his wife to be small. But he grew up in that house, and when you grow up in a house where one person controls the temperature of every room, you learn very quickly that the cost of pushing back is not worth the noise. Daniel was a man who had spent 30-some years making that calculation. He had made peace with the arithmetic long before I arrived. My arrival simply meant that now someone else was absorbing part of the cost he had always split alone. I understood that on some level almost from the beginning. I didn't like it, but I understood it. I told myself it was manageable. I told myself that I was an adult who had navigated difficult clients, demanding projects, rooms that didn't want to cooperate. I could handle one woman's carefully measured condescension. That is what avoidance tells you. in its most convincing voice. It tells you that endurance is the same as management. The place card started the second Thanksgiving. The first Thanksgiving I attended as Daniel's girlfriend, the seating was informal. People sat where they landed, paper plates, plastic cups, a folding table added in the dining room to handle the overflow. Linda looked at me across the table that first year and said, "Daniel tells me you do something with houses," and I said that I was a designer, and she nodded the way people nod when they're already thinking about the next thing they plan to say. The second Thanksgiving, things had changed. Linda had decided to formalize. Actual china, rented tables, white linens, and place cards. Ivory cardstock, each one handwritten in Linda's careful script. It was genuinely beautiful. I remember thinking that it was the kind of detail that elevates a gathering into an occasion. My place card was at the end of the outer table, beside Daniel's cousin's girlfriend, a woman I had never met before, facing the wall. Daniel's place card was at the head table, beside his mother. I told myself it was a first-year oversight. There were many people to seat. It was easy to miscalculate. I helped clear the dishes and told Linda the food was wonderful because it was, and I went home thinking that next year would be different. Next year was not different. The year after was not different either. By the fourth Thanksgiving, I had stopped expecting the place card to be anywhere other than exactly where Linda had decided it belonged. Outer table, corner seat, facing the wrong direction. Emma Walker, rendered in Linda's elegant script on a piece of cardstock that said, without saying a word, that I was adjacent to this family rather than inside it. Daniel noticed. I know he noticed because once, driving home after Thanksgiving 3, he said almost to the windshield, "She does that with everyone new. It takes time." I asked him how much time. He didn't answer. He turned up the radio and I let him, because the conversation we would have needed to have instead was a long one, and we were both tired, and sometimes exhaustion is indistinguishable from acceptance. I filed it away, the way I was filing many things by then. I should tell you about the restaurant. Harlow's is a family-owned American restaurant on the eastern edge of the town where Daniel grew up. It has been there for over 30 years. Exposed brick walls, maple floors, windows that face a small courtyard garden that is stunning in spring and quietly beautiful even in November. The kind of place that feels like it was built by someone who actually loved the idea of people gathering, eating, staying too long, going home full. The owner is a man named Carl Harlow. He inherited the restaurant from his parents, who opened it in the late 1980s. Carl has no interest in any other life. He never did. The restaurant is not a stepping stone for him. It is the whole destination. I first went to Harlow's in 2016, the year after Daniel and I were married, when a colleague suggested it for a work dinner. I remember walking in and having the immediate professional reaction that I always have when I enter a space that was designed with genuine intention. It wasn't showy. It wasn't pretending to be something it wasn't. The bones were honest. The light was right. Someone had made very deliberate choices about how this room should feel, and those choices had held for 30 years without straining. I went back on my own the following week. Then again with Daniel. Then again with a client, then 2 clients, then by habit. Carl, and I started talking the way people talk in a restaurant you go to often enough that the owner stops treating you like a transaction. He was thoughtful, funny, deeply committed to the place in a way that was touching and occasionally exhausting. He had opinions about every table placement, every menu adjustment, every decision that touched the experience of being at Harlow's. He also had a problem he wasn't telling me about. I found out in the spring of 2019. We had gotten to the point of occasional real conversations, the kind you have when you're both waiting for something and neither of you is in a hurry. Carl mentioned, almost offhandedly, that the building lease was coming up for renewal and the landlord had restructured the terms in a way that was going to be difficult. Difficult was the word he used. I asked him to be more specific. He was quiet for a moment, and then he told me the real number. The renewal terms would require a significant capital infusion that he simply did not have. He had been carrying the restaurant on margins that worked only because every single variable had cooperated. One bad variable, one slow season, one equipment failure, one lease renegotiation, and the math stopped working. I asked him what his options were. He listed them. None of them were good. The bank had already said no once. Family didn't have the capital. Selling was something he refused to consider, and I believed him when he said it because some people are telling the truth when they say a thing like that, and Carl was one of them. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I talked to my accountant. I reviewed what I had set aside over 8 years of a career I had built carefully and without anyone's help. And then I made an offer. It was not a glamorous transaction. It was not a windfall for anyone. I offered Carl a private investment, structured as a limited partnership, that would cover the lease gap and a small capital reserve for the first 2 years. In return, I would hold a minority ownership stake in the restaurant, silent, non-operational, no role in daily management. Carl would run Harlow's exactly as he always had. I would be, for all practical purposes, invisible. I wanted it that way. We used a proper attorney. We signed the partnership agreement. We each kept our copies. I did not tell Daniel. That requires an explanation. I did not keep it from him out of deceit. I kept it from him because I already knew what the conversation would become. Daniel would tell his mother, not out of malice but out of habit, the way children of controlling parents share information without realizing it is information. Linda would hear that Emma had put money into a local restaurant, and within a week it would become a story about Emma playing at business, Emma spending money on vanity projects, Emma trying to make herself interesting. I had watched Linda do that to other people's accomplishments. I had no interest in handing her mine, so I kept the blue folder in my desk drawer, metaphorically speaking. I had a copy of the partnership agreement, the ownership records, Carl's notarized signature, and mine, the whole documented reality of it filed and organized in the way that people who build things carefully always document what they have built. It sat there quietly for 4 years, doing nothing, meaning nothing to anyone except Carl and me, until the Thanksgiving that Linda removed my chair. The invitation came in October of that year. Linda sent paper invitations. She had always sent paper invitations for Thanksgiving, which was one of the things I genuinely admired about her, the commitment to the ritual of it. A cream envelope, a small autumn leaf printed in the corner, the address written by hand. The invitation said that Thanksgiving dinner would be held at Harlow's restaurant this year. Linda had arranged a private event booking for the full extended family. 25 people. A sit-down dinner with the full menu, private room, the works. I read the invitation at the kitchen counter, and I felt a very specific kind of stillness. I want to be honest about what I thought in that moment. I did not think about what was going to happen. I did not think about the partnership agreement or Carl or the ownership records. I thought, first and only, that it was a strange coincidence, the kind that happens in ordinary life without meaning anything, and that I should simply go and be gracious and get through it the way I had gotten through 9 years of these gatherings. I RSVP'd yes. I wrote my name on the response card, Emma Walker, attending. I mailed it back in the return envelope provided. 3 weeks later, Daniel and I drove to his hometown for Thanksgiving. I dressed carefully that morning. Not because I was trying to impress Linda. I had long since stopped dressing for Linda's approval, but because I had always believed, in a quiet, personal way, that the care you put into showing up for a gathering is a form of respect for the occasion itself. A gray wrap dress I had owned for 2 years and loved. Simple jewelry. My hair done properly. The kind of put together that says I am here, I am present, I mean to be here. Daniel drove. We talked about the drive, about his cousin who was bringing a new girlfriend, about the pie I had offered to make that Linda had declined by saying they were having the food catered. I carried the place card in my memory the whole drive. Not literally, I mean that I carried the expectation of it, where it would be placed. Whether this year would be the year Linda finally seat me at the adult table, the real table, the one where the family that mattered sat and talked and felt like a family. I had been carrying that expectation for 9 years. I had learned to carry it lightly, the way you carry something you've given up expecting to put down. Harlow's had been transformed. Carl and his staff had arranged the main dining room into a long formal configuration. 2 large rectangular tables, a head table, and an extended family table, all dressed in ivory linen, crystal glasses, small floral arrangements in amber and rust. It was beautiful. I felt the particular emotion of seeing a space you know well made into something new, the way you feel when a piece of furniture you've walked past 100 times is moved into the light, and you finally see its grain. I walked in behind Daniel and scanned the room the way I always scan a room. The layout, the light, the details, and the place cards. Every seat had one. Linda had brought her own, the same ivory cardstock as every year, the same careful script. 25 place cards for 25 people. I walked along the head table first. There were 10 seats. Daniel's was near the center, between his sister Rachel and his brother-in-law. Linda was at the true head of the table, naturally. There was a card beside Daniel's that read Emma. I saw the first 3 letters of my name, and then I saw that it was not my card at all. It was Emily, Daniel's niece, 12 years old. Given my seat, I walked to the second table. I found every card, every name, moving through them in order. I was methodical. I did not allow myself to feel the thing building in my chest until I had completed the audit. 24 place cards, 24 names. Not one of them was mine. I stood at the end of the second table for a long moment. My chair was gone. My place card was gone. I had been removed from this gathering as cleanly as a name struck from a list. That was when Linda's voice came from behind me, warm and carrying and perfectly pitched for an audience. "Oh, Emma, there seems to have been a mix-up with your seat. These things happen with large groups." She paused just long enough. "Maybe a folding chair in the kitchen would suit you better." Several people laughed. A ripple of it, the kind that follows a hostess's lead because it feels safer to laugh along than to be the one person who doesn't. Daniel's brother laughed. His aunt touched Linda's arm with the delighted familiarity of a woman who has been on the receiving end of Linda's sharp edges often enough to be relieved when they are pointed elsewhere. Daniel said nothing. I stood completely still. I kept my face neutral the way I keep my face neutral in client meetings when someone says something they should not have said, when a comment requires absorption rather than reaction because reacting will only extend the moment. I looked at Linda. She was smiling. Not cruelly, that was the thing about Linda's smiles. They were always plausibly friendly. You could not take a photograph of that smile and prove anything by it. I said quietly, "I'll check with the hostess." And I turned and walked toward the front of the restaurant. The hostess that evening was a young woman named Priya who had worked at Harlow's for 3 years. I knew her slightly, the way you know the staff of a place you visit often. She recognized me with a small nod as I approached the host's stand. I told her, simply, that there seemed to be an issue with my seating reservation, that my name was Emma Walker and I could not locate my place card. Priya opened the reservation folder without hesitation. This is the thing about a well-run restaurant. The records are orderly. Carl runs a tight operation. Every booking is documented. Every table assignment is noted, and for a private event of this size, everything had been prearranged in writing. Priya ran her finger down the seating chart. I watched her expression change. "Ms. Walker," she said, and her voice had become careful in the way voices become careful when someone has just discovered something they weren't expecting. "Your name is on the original assignment. You were placed at the head table. Seat 2. She looked up at me. "Seat 2 is currently marked as Emily Walker." I asked her to look at the original document, the booking confirmation that had been submitted when the event was arranged. She turned to the second page of the reservation folder. I could see the header, Walker Family Private Event. Below it, the original seating chart in Linda's own handwriting, submitted to Carl's office 3 weeks prior. My name was there, Emma Walker, head table, seat 2. Written by Linda herself, and beneath it, In the same handwriting but slightly different ink, the kind of slightly different ink that tells you something was added after the original document was complete. The name had been crossed through. Emma had become Emily. Priya looked at the document for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she said, carefully, "I need to let the owner know about this." I said, "Please do." I stood at the host stand, and I breathed. I was aware of the room behind me. I was aware of the murmur of the family settling into their seats, of Linda's voice carrying some story about the centerpieces, of Daniel's laugh in the middle distance, familiar and unknowing. I was aware, too, of something else. Something I had not planned for, had not engineered, had simply allowed to exist in its own quiet drawer for 4 years. Carl Harlow was in this building. The partnership agreement with my name on it was on file in this building's office. And a hostess had just walked to the back of that building to tell her employer that someone had altered a seating document to remove a co-owner of the restaurant from her assigned place at the table. I had not arranged any of this. I want to say that again because it is the part that still moves me when I think about it. The truth simply found the room it had been waiting for. Carl came out from the kitchen. I had not seen him in several weeks. He was wearing his usual dark apron over a collared shirt, the working uniform of a man who is never not working, and when he saw me standing at the host stand, he covered the distance between us in about 4 seconds. "Emma." He said my name the way you say the name of someone you are relieved to see. He looked at Priya. Priya showed him the reservation folder. I watched him read the original seating assignment and the alteration above it. Carl has a very still face when he is managing something important. He looked at the document for what felt like a long time. Then he looked at me. "Come with me," he said. "Please." We stepped to the side of the host stand, just out of the main sight line of the dining room. Carl spoke quietly. "Someone altered the booking document," he said. "Your name was assigned to the head table. Someone replaced it after the original submission." I told him I was aware. He looked at me for a moment. "Emma, you're a partner in this restaurant. You have been for 4 years. Whatever confusion there is about seating, I want to be clear that there is no version of this evening where you are standing at my host stand without a seat at my table. I want to be clear that there is no version of this evening where you are standing at my host stand without a seat at my table." He said it simply, without drama, the way a man states a fact that he considers beyond argument. And in that moment, standing in the entryway of a restaurant I had helped save from a landlord's ultimatum 6 years ago, I felt something I had not felt in any of the 9 years of Thanksgiving dinners that had come before. I felt correctly placed. Carl straightened. He picked up my original place card, Emma Walker, in Linda's script, which Priya had found in the event management file, the original that had been removed and replaced, and he held it with the care of someone handling a document that is about to do a great deal of work. Then he walked into the dining room. The room was mostly settled. People were in their seats, the way people settle into their seats before a dinner officially begins. Not quite quiet. Not quite the noise of mid-meal, the particular social hum of people who are comfortable, who believe the order of things has been established, and nothing will now disturb it. Carl stood at the entrance to the main room and did not need to raise his voice to be heard. The particular authority of a man in his own restaurant is a quiet authority. People feel it before they process it. I apologize for the interruption. The hum settled. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Carl Harlow. My family opened this restaurant in 1988. I've been running it since my parents retired in 2011, and I expect to be running it for a long time to come, in part because of the people who believed in it when that outcome wasn't guaranteed. He paused. 6 years ago, this restaurant was in a difficult position. I won't go into the details, but the short version is that there were several months where I genuinely did not know whether Harlow's would still be here. A private investor stepped in with a capital infusion that allowed me to renegotiate the lease and carry the business through that period. That investor asked for no recognition, no role in management, no credit in the restaurant story. She simply believed in the place and wanted it to continue existing. The room was very quiet now. I was standing just inside the entrance. I could see faces turning. I could see Linda's back at the head table going slightly rigid. That investor, Carl said, is a limited partner in this restaurant. She is a part owner of this building and this business. Her name is Emma Walker. He crossed the room to me. He held out the place card. Emma Walker, ivory cardstock, Linda's handwriting, returned to me like a thing that had always been mine and had only been temporarily misplaced. Your seat is at the head table, Carl said. Seat 2. I'm sorry for any confusion this evening. He walked me to the head table. The family at seat 2, Emily, 12 years old, who had done nothing wrong and was looking at the adults around her with the wide eyes of a child who knows something significant is happening but cannot parse what, was gently redirected by Priya to a new seat that had been added, a real chair, not a folding one, beside her mother. I sat down at the head table. I set my place card in front of me. The silence in that room lasted, I think, about 15 seconds. 15 seconds is a long time to be silent at a Thanksgiving dinner. It is long enough for 23 people to recalibrate, to reassemble what they thought they understood, to review the things they laughed at 40 minutes ago and feel the laugh turn to something else in their stomachs. Daniel was looking at me. His expression was not the expression of a man who is angry or betrayed. It was the expression of a man who has just understood something he should have understood a long time ago and is not sure what to do with the understanding. Linda was not looking at me. Linda was looking at her place card. She did not say anything. That was the part that surprised me most, I think, that she sat in the silence of it instead of moving immediately to control the narrative. Linda, who had a practiced line for every social emergency, who had been managing the temperature of rooms since before I was born, had nothing in that moment. Her technique required a target that was less certain than she was. And I was no longer less certain than she was. I picked up my water glass. My hands were steady. Across the table, Daniel's aunt said carefully, "That is wonderful, Emma. How long have you been involved with the restaurant?" And I told her pleasantly that it had been about 6 years, and she nodded with the particular enthusiasm of someone who is grateful to have been offered a way back to normal conversation. Dinner resumed. Linda did not speak directly to me for the rest of the evening. I want to tell you about the drive home. Daniel drove. For the first 20 minutes, he said nothing. I watched the dark road and the familiar passing of highway lights, and I did not push the silence. I had learned, in 9 years of marriage, the difference between a silence that needs to be opened and a silence that is already working through something. This was the second kind. "You never told me," he said, finally. "No," I agreed. "Why?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, because I knew that if I told you, you would have told her. Not to hurt me, just because that's how information moves in your family. And I knew what she would have done with it. He was quiet. "She would have found a way to make it smaller," I said. "A way to make it about vanity or pretension. Something you couldn't argue with without causing a fight. And I didn't want to spend the next 6 years defending an investment I made with my own money in a place I loved." Daniel drove for another mile. Then he said quietly, "She's been doing it for 9 years. "Yes," I said. "The place cards. Yes. The introductions. The way she describes what you do. Yes." He exhaled. It was a long, slow exhale, the kind that carries years in it. "I should have said something," he said. "Years ago. I should have said stop. I saw it. He stopped. "I waited. I didn't want the fight," he said. "I told myself it wasn't that serious. That you were handling it." "I was handling it," I said. "That doesn't mean you were off the hook." "No," he said. "It doesn't." We drove in silence for a while longer. The kind of silence that isn't comfortable, exactly, but is honest. The kind that says we are not done with this conversation, we are just letting it breathe. "She publicly humiliated you," Daniel said. "In front of everyone. In a restaurant you own. Pardon, Emma." I'm not being modest. I'm being accurate. He almost smiled at that. It was a brief thing, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. That's very you, he said. Yes, I said. It is. The holidays changed after that. Not dramatically. Not with a confrontation or a reckoning or a formal declaration of new terms. Life rarely offers those. What it offers, instead, are incremental shifts, small adjustments that accumulate over months into a new arrangement you couldn't have planned but can now recognize as the one that should have existed all along. Linda did not apologize to me. I want to be honest about that. She is not a woman who apologizes. What she did, instead, was adjust. The way certain people adjust when the cost of a behavior becomes visible to them in a way they cannot ignore. She was cooler with me for a while after that Thanksgiving, then gradually less cool. Then, by spring, something approaching civil. She still sometimes introduced me at family events as Daniel's wife, Emma, in a tone that did not include my profession. But she stopped the smaller things. The deliberately wrong seat, the performed vagueness about what I did for a living, the jokes designed to give other people permission to look past me. It was not forgiveness. It was not warmth. But it was the end of something I had been surviving for 9 years. The family gathering I want to tell you about happened the following spring. A birthday dinner for Daniel's sister Rachel, held at a restaurant Rachel had chosen herself. 14 people. A normal, uncatered occasion, nothing formal about it. I arrived after Daniel, who had come straight from work. I found my seat at the table, no place cards this time, just people sitting where they'd landed, and I sat down. My chair was where it was supposed to be. No one had moved it. No one had reconsidered my placement. I was simply there, in the middle of the gathering, part of the table. Daniel sat down beside me. He poured water into both our glasses without being asked, the small, unconscious attentiveness that had always been one of the things I loved about him. And then he leaned toward me, not quietly enough to be a secret, just quietly enough to be meant for me. I should have stood up for you years ago, he said. I'm sorry I didn't. I looked at him for a moment, not at the man who had stayed quiet in the car on the way home from 3 Thanksgivings. Not at the man who had told me it would get better without making it better, but at the man who had, when it finally cost him something, a conversation with his mother that I knew had not been easy, chosen to say the right thing to the right person. Yes, I said. You should have. And then I picked up my menu, because the moment didn't need more than that. Here is what I have learned. Not as a lesson I prepared, but as something I understand now the way you understand a room, when you've finally seen it in the right light. There are people in your life who will measure your value by what you produce for them, by what you cost them and what you return, by whether you are useful in the way they have decided to define useful. And there are people who will measure your value by what you are, not what you generate, not what you contribute, what you are. The difference between those two categories is the whole of it. The whole of love, the whole of family, the whole of what makes a gathering a home instead of a transaction. For 9 years, I sat at the wrong table. Not because I wasn't good enough for the right one, but because I kept accepting the seat I was given instead of asking who had decided where I belonged. I didn't ask loudly, in the end. I asked quietly. I asked the hostess whether there was another seat available. And the truth, which had been sitting in a file in the back office of a restaurant for 4 years, stood up on its own. The place card is still in my desk drawer at home. Emma Walker, in Linda's careful script, ivory cardstock. I kept it, not as a trophy, not as evidence of anything. I kept it because it is a document, a record of a thing that happened. And because I have always believed in keeping records of what you have built and what it cost you and what it finally became. Every time I look at it, I think about what Carl said at the host stand that evening. There is no version of this evening where you are standing at my host stand without a seat at my table. I think about what it would have meant to hear something like that years earlier. From a mother-in-law, from a husband, from anyone in that room who saw what was happening, and chose the comfort of silence over the discomfort of truth. And then I think about the more important thing, that the seat was always mine, not because of the investment, not because of the partnership agreement, not because of any piece of paper in any file, in any office. It was mine because I had earned it every ordinary day in ways that had nothing to do with what I owned and everything to do with who I was. The paper simply made it legible to the people who had never bothered to read me correctly. That's my story. If you've ever sat in the wrong seat, if you've ever accepted the folding chair when you knew, quietly, that you deserve the table, I want you to know that the truth doesn't always need you to raise your voice. Sometimes you only need to let it be found. And the people who only recognize your value when they discover your position, they already told you everything you needed to know. Thank you for being here. Subscribe if this story found you at the right moment. Share it with someone who's been sitting at the wrong table for too long. I'll see you in the next one.